Perspective. Why we don't always see eye to eye. As you learned in thinking about problem definition, people don't always agree on how to see the world. What one person sees as a problem, another sees as just the way things are. This disagreement extends throughout the critical thinking process. People view problems differently. They evaluate premises and conclusions differently. And they have different ideas about what actions should be taken. Many of the standards you've learned about as part of the critical thinking process are subject to differences of opinion. A premise that is acceptable to one person will be unacceptable to another. Someone may evaluate a certain premise as relevant to the argument, while another person will claim it's irrelevant. An argument one person sees as very strong may be viewed by another person as weak. Acceptable or unacceptable, relevant or irrelevant, sufficient or insufficient, strong or weak, all of these evaluation standards are potentially subject to disagreement among reasonable people. That last part is key. If two people disagree over whether a certain premise is acceptable or not, it is not necessarily the case that one person is using her reason while the other person is judging on instinct or faith. Two people can use reason and logic to evaluate a premise or argument and arrive at very different judgments. How is this possible? A significant part of the explanation has to do with perspective. Have you ever heard someone talk about nature versus nurture? Many people wonder how much of what we're like as individuals is due to nature, that is, what we're born with, and how much is the product of nurture, how we're raised, how we're treated by society, the particular experiences we have, and so on. Clearly, our height and eye color are the result of nature. But what about our social, political, economic, and ethical beliefs and opinions? What about our reaction to confusing or uncertain sensory experiences? The way we process the world around us has a lot to do with how we've been nurtured, how we were raised by family and our community, our education, our professional experiences, life events, and so on. These factors come together to provide us with our unique perspective, a lens, or set of lenses, through which we view and interpret the world around us. Not only do you have a unique perspective on the world, but your perspective on events can change. At one point, you may have felt as though you needed to have the latest and greatest smartphone. You lived at home and you didn't need to worry about things like rent and car payments. You wanted a phone that could do everything and looked really cool. But then, you moved out on your own. All of a sudden, you couldn't afford the latest and greatest phone. In light of your new financial circumstances, it didn't make sense to spend all that money for technology beyond what you actually need. So, owning the latest developments in smartphones went from a reasonable decision to one that you couldn't rationally justify. Now, because our views have been shaped by personal experiences does not mean they're merely subjective opinions that can be dismissed as purely biased or otherwise unacceptable parts of an argument. Recognizing that our experiences shape our views does not mean that we're irrational or illogical in how we apply those views to problems and issues. Most of us grew up in fairly comfortable circumstances. We had a safe, warm home with plenty to eat. So when we think about people living in a park with all of their belongings in a grocery cart, we may not understand why they don't just get a job. Given our background, that seems like a reasonable solution. But think about someone our age who wasn't as fortunate and didn't always know whether there would be enough to eat that night. They're likely to have a different view on the person living out of a grocery cart. Is one of these views better than the other? The extreme differences in backgrounds led to profound differences in the way the homeless are viewed. Remember that those differences in experience don't mean that either argument is more or less rational. Our perspective impacts the opinions we form about non-empirical issues that cannot be proven true or false. At the core of many social, political, economic, cultural, and moral issues are disagreements about what values we want to promote and how best to promote them. Just as in the case of the homeless, where we stand on such disagreements is shaped by our perspective. In addition to impacting our beliefs and opinions, the experiences that help shape those opinions also influence how we process and understand the sensory experiences we have with the world. Our perspective can lead us to interpret murky or unclear sensory experiences in different ways. Imagine that one night, a bright light suddenly flashes in the sky over Salt Lake City. Two people with very different perspectives on the possibility of life existing away from the planet Earth both see this flash. One of these people firmly believes that there is no extraterrestrial life. Everything he has been taught by family and in school has led him to this belief. He sees the flash and wonders perhaps what kind of weather phenomenon might have caused it, or whether the nearby Hill Air Force Base is testing out some new weapon. The other person has had numerous life experiences that lead her to believe there is intelligent life on other planets. She sees the flash and wonders what kind of UFO it might be and where it came from. Our perspective on the world influences how we interpret things that we see, hear, feel, and so on. To say that our perspective on the world is impacted by personal experiences is not to say that we're somehow trapped by those experiences, forced to see the world in a specific way. Two people can experience the same event but respond differently to that experience. Victims of gun violence, for example, do not all hold the same views on gun control. But identifying the role of perspective and how individuals choose to craft their argument is important. Being aware of perspective helps us more fully evaluate and examine premises and conclusions. It allows us to acknowledge alternative views to the ones we hold by recognizing that there are many possible ways to interpret and process shared experiences and events. In order to work together to solve broader problems, each of us needs to consider the impact of our perspective as well as that of others. Seeing a problem from multiple perspectives and understanding how each impacts the conclusions others reach can lead to solutions that benefit the broadest group of people.